recognize myself now for a few minutes of questions, as undefined as that might be. Lieutenant Smith, one of the reasons we're holding this hearing is because conversations that I had with Ranking Member Demings and Chairman Katko, and I want to recognize them, and as law enforcement professionals, they've been invaluable in educating me about some of these issues. But the primary concern that I had, that I brought up to both of them, and they shared this concern, is the lack of perimeter security at airports. I think all three of us fly every week, and I can't speak for them, but I'm going in and out of airports where it is not rare to see no security at the drop-off point, and then to get inside the airport in the ticketing area and not see any security. Does that concern you?
Yes, absolutely, especially from the history of certain terrorist events.
I would expect that answer. In talking with Ranking Member Demings about the jurisdictional issues between local law enforcement and TSA, and trying to decide how this needs to be layered, whether it should be local law enforcement deploying the canines versus TSA, I think that's yet to be resolved. But I do think the issue is that we need more quality dogs. We need a much more visible presence. You made a statement very early on that just the appearance of a dog or a canine unit is a deterrent. And I mentioned airports. I think the same thing's true of surface transportation hubs and major events. This is the primary focus of this is figuring out how do we get more dogs approved, and particularly domestic dogs, but how do we get those deployed? What resources do we need to provide to make that happen so that we avoid another catastrophic event like we've just witnessed in Las Vegas?
Well, I think for the end user, no matter how successful you are with the domestic breeding program, and that it's going to come down to a budgetary concern for the local agency. You know, whoever is the authority over the international airport or the domestic airport or whatever, it's going to come down to actually being able to pay for those dogs no matter what the price point is. So whether there's any assistance, you know, from the federal government or anything like that, that's going to be the biggest concern. Because people raise their hand and want to work with a dog, you don't have a shortage of that. You'll have the officers that want to come out and do that job. It's a matter of actually being able to fund it at our level.
One of the things that we were talking about earlier, and Congressman Rogers brought this up, and I think I brought it up in my questions earlier, is reducing the number of dogs that are rejected. And I think one of the ways you do that, Dr. Otto, is that you have very clear evaluation standards. And you have, can you tell us how, for instance, TSA sets and evaluates standards for passenger screening and explosive detection?
I'm afraid I can't tell you how they do that because I haven't worked directly with them. We use the TSA screening process for our puppies to see if they're able to enter in, but I have actually not worked with the TSA at the level of that training and evaluation.
Well, wouldn't it make sense that if local law enforcement, for instance, they have jurisdiction over local airports, if they're within their city limits or their area of jurisdiction, so there's going to be overlap. Wouldn't it make sense that there be set standards across the board so that when you have local law enforcement or other law enforcement interacting with federal agencies like TSA, you've got the dogs all trained to the same standard? And I realize the handlers will, you know, that changes some things somewhat, but wouldn't that make sense that everybody's training to the same standards?
Yes, I believe, and I believe that DHS has been doing some testing, and I think one of the things about the standards too is who is evaluating the dogs. It really does need to be an outside group evaluating the dogs as opposed to an internal assessment. And I think that might be where some of our challenge also comes. If we're sort of evaluating ourselves, we're a little softer than maybe we should be.
Is there enough capacity to supply our domestic needs, whether it's TSA or local law enforcement? Is there enough domestic capacity to provide those dogs?
Currently, I don't think that there is. I think that that's why we need to move on to a dedicated breeding program, and I think we need to realize that there's a 2-year lag from the time we start breeding. So if we want them tomorrow, we needed to be planning this 2 years ago.
Okay, that goes back to the business model that I think we're going to have to develop, and the resources that Congressman Rogers mentioned. Unless there are other members with questions, I thank our witnesses for appearing before us today. I would like to just make this point. Again, this has been a very collaborative effort by both subcommittees, and even though Chairman Katko and Ranking Member Demings and I began talking about these issues months ago, the timeliness of this joint hearing is not lost on the members of these two subcommittees. The horror that we saw taking place in Las Vegas Sunday night loomed large over us as another reminder of the dangers that we all face and the responsibility that we share to ensure the safety and security of all Americans. And to echo what has already been said, we pray for the grieving families who have lost friends and loved ones, and pray for the full recovery of those who are injured. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit a written opening statement or questions for the record. If there's no further business without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned.